Hi, this show talks about books that feature mental health and mental illness topics. The discussion will be from the point of view of mental health professionals. There are many books that include this topic, and my hope is that more and more people know about them because they help to decrease the stigma and help people not feel so alone in their struggle. I am your host, Robyn Tamanaha, licensed marriage and family therapist. Today, I will be talking about the book Words on Bathroom Walls by Julia Walton, which is about a teen boy living with schizophrenia who was trying to keep his diagnosis a secret from the new people in his life. This book is a young adult fiction. It's recommended for grades 7 through 9. This story follows the main character, Adam, and it's written in the first person as if he's explaining his thoughts and experiences on paper to his therapist. This book not only talks about mental illness, but also about the stigma that comes with it, because people at his previous school had a lot to say and assume about Adam, which can be assumed is the reason why he's at a new school. His stepfather even had to use his power as a legal professional to advocate for Adam's rights at his new school and also to ensure that his diagnosis was not found out about to parents of the other students. I'll get into the backstory of that in a little bit. Throughout all of this, while Adam is navigating a new high school and making new relationship connections, he's also second-guessing himself because he's actively having to tame his hallucinations or at least not pay too much attention to them. Before I delve into different parts of the book, I want to first give you the disclaimer that there will be some spoilers in this episode, so if you don't want to know any spoilers, I recommend that you read the book first, then come back. If you don't mind hearing about spoilers or have already read the book, go ahead and continue listening. So there are multiple topics throughout this book I want to talk about. The first one is related to trauma. And what I mean by that is specifically there was a loss of a childhood friendship that Adam experienced that was traumatic. What happened was the parents of his childhood friends had pretty much disconnected and ended their friendship. When Adam was first diagnosed with schizophrenia, he told his friend everything. And then that friend's mother called Adam's mother. And all he had heard when he heard his mother speaking to his friend's mother over the phone is that his mother said he has nothing to be afraid of. Later on in the book, Adam sees his former childhood friend in a grocery store, and it's obvious that the former friend is trying not to look at him. He also had friends at his old school, grew up with them, but when they found out about his diagnosis, they were afraid of him. Another trauma that he had experienced was actually related to his stepfather's mother, who was very vocal about how she did not like Adam. She looked at and talked about and talked to him as if he was a monster. So when someone experiences a traumatic event because of their diagnosis, such as these, it understandably feels bad, but it can also really impact how the person feels about themselves and their future. It can also set the stage for how they feel about their prognosis, aka the outcome of their diagnosis, of their life in relation to the mental illness. Understandably, a person could think, well, this bad thing happened, or these bad things happened because of my symptoms and diagnosis, so that means these other things could possibly go bad and not work out. There is a psychologist by the name of David Miklowitz, and he does a lot of research when it comes to bipolar disorder, but he has great books. And one of the things that he talks about is this factor of over-identification with a diagnosis. And sometimes what comes along with that is that the individual has had a traumatic event, a letdown, something huge that was because of the diagnosis in a way. And other examples of that would be maybe someone has had difficulty with jobs or like relationships or, these things that are very prominent parts of their life or very, very important to them were affected later on because of the symptoms that they were experiencing at the time, that weren't most likely yet managed. So David talks about how the individual could almost view their diagnosis as this like quote unquote life sentence, meaning that this is kind of the end all be all. And this is going to guide my life, So we see this a lot in therapy too, with clients who just kind of have a difficult time with their diagnosis and kind of envisioning a future, because there are so many different examples that kind of go back to the diagnosis and why, things are just not going to work out. So for the main character in the story, he very much experienced that, and to lose a friend and to experience, a family member who was very much like mischaracterizing you, like doesn't feel good at all, and it can definitely diminish like hope and outcome for the future. So that's one thing the book talked about, and I felt like that was a very realistic, example of something that someone could possibly be experiencing. Another topic that this book talked about was stigma and misconception. And it was done in a way where in the book, the media had influenced how certain mental illnesses are looked at. And this is also something that we actually experience in real life. I found it really interesting that the example that was used in the book as a media reference was a real life example. And that real life example was the Sandy Hook shooting. So I kind of feel like that example, when it came to stigma in the media, made it even more powerful because it was something that really, really happened in the United States. So when referencing the Sandy Hook shooting in the book, Adam experienced being looked at, judged, and shooed away because of people assuming that he would be violent like someone else in the media who does like a mass shooting. And when this happened and Adam is describing his experience about that and not feeling like he is that person, he says something really interesting, and I'll read it. It says, I'd like to take this opportunity to say that I don't like guns. I don't own guns, and I don't have any desire to shoot anyone ever. I don't play violent video games. I don't even really like laser tag. So I thought that was pretty hilarious because it's almost like this PSA, like, everyone just FYI, like, that is not me. I think it's important to see warning signs in an individual. However, there's also importance in knowing that when it comes to these diagnoses, they're on a spectrum from mild to severe, with symptoms really coming about and expressing itself in different ways depending on the individual. So in our DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that us therapists will use when it comes to diagnosing someone, and there's also a lot of researchers that come together to make this manual. Right now it's on its 5th edition, and there's a lot of information in it that has to do with causes and outcomes and everything, not just the symptoms that are displayed within each diagnosis. So in our DSM, symptoms are listed. However, only a certain number of symptoms are required for diagnoses, meaning that someone will not display all. For schizophrenia, aggression is not a criteria for the diagnosis. So I'll read you something from the DSM. It says, hostility and aggression can be associated with schizophrenia, although spontaneous or random assault is uncommon. Aggression is more frequent for young males and for individuals with a past history of violence, not adherence to treatment, meaning they don't attend therapy or maybe take medication, substance use, and impulsivity. It should be noted that the vast majority of persons with schizophrenia are not aggressive and are more frequently victimized than are individuals in the general population. So I thought that was important to put out there. I know, right now there's a lot, going on with shootings, but as therapists, we look at the overall picture and the individual's history, when it comes to diagnoses. And, I really encourage you to, like, whatever's going on, out there, that there's probably a lot more to the story that maybe we don't know about. I hope there comes a time when we really, really get to hear, like, what it is in the background of each person's experience, like what led them to now. And this is very much what we do as therapists, like just when someone's struggling in life or when someone's experiencing symptoms, or maybe if they have a diagnosis, there's importance in being very holistic and looking at the overall general picture. So I thought that was really good. In the book is really just addressing it like head on. Like, here's a real life example of what is happening, and here's probably what someone who is living with this diagnosis may experience. Another thing that I thought the book did a good job conveying was just the whole topic of therapy, and therapy when it comes to youth and teenagers. Therapy with youth takes time, and this book is a good example of that. Oftentimes, it's when the person attending therapy is doing so maybe because someone else told them to go. In this case, Adam is a minor. He's a teenager, so we can assume, maybe he's in therapy because his parents took him, or, it was required for whatever reason. So Adam goes back and forth between his feelings about his therapist. One myth is that by taking a teen to therapy means that they'll immediately just talk about exactly what their parents or their caregivers would like them to talk about. And I will say that is not the case. The process is more organic, like trust has to be built, and then they may open up on their own over time. Also, unfortunately, talking about feelings to a stranger can be awkward. Very rarely in life are we put in a room with someone where we just have to be like completely vulnerable. And for teenagers, because of what's going on, and just already like trying to figure out where they stand in the world and like fitting in and all that, like I think when it comes to therapy, it can be a challenge because we're having to, kind of slowly take down those walls. When it comes to therapy and commitment, like I think sometimes people think, well, it's like, okay, so you're here, so you're just going to talk about things, and that means you're committed. However, it's also their behaviors. So it's not just through sharing details or maybe slowly opening up. It's that the person actually like showed up to session. And although Adam does experience kind of going back and forth about how he feels about therapy, how he feels about his therapist, he does show up to each session. And after some time, he did begin to look at his therapist positively and ended up being appreciative of his therapist. The book talks about the creative way that the therapy can be provided. So the most common thing people think of is like talk therapy, especially as adults. Like this is how, for the most part, like we express ourselves is through talking. But there are also many different types of therapy. So Adam was interesting in that, like, and this is how the entire book is written, is that, like, he's writing his thoughts and his experiences and kind of what's going on in his life on paper to his therapist. So he wasn't able to really just open up verbally to his therapist, although he was with others, like family. He made friends, ended up having a girlfriend. So he was very much able to communicate. It's just like, his level of comfort maybe wasn't there yet in the therapy room. So it was done through writing it down. There are many different types of therapy. There's art therapy, play therapy. There's even therapists who are really trained in psychodrama. So the purpose is that an individual is able to express themselves. And it doesn't necessarily have to be through just words. It's what works for them and allows them to convey what they're experiencing. Another good example of that is like play therapy. This is something that can be done with all ages. However, it is definitely the mode of treatment for very young children, like 5 years old and younger. I spent time as a 0 to 5 therapist, and toddlers, they're still like building their language, and everything they do is in general just through play, which is why they're, buying a lot of toys, and they're doing like imaginative play and like make believe and all that. So it's kind of like we meet them where they're at and how they're expressing themselves, and we use that as a way for them to be able to express how they're feeling and work out their thoughts and kind of work out what they're going through. I personally love play. I thought that was a very, very fun intervention to do, and also art intervention. So this book did a good realistic way of kind of showing like there are definitely more creative ways to have a therapy session and how to go about exchanging information and kind of telling someone what's going on in your life and like what you're feeling. Another part of the book that was like really good was the importance of interactions with others that don't have anything to do with the diagnosis. There's definitely an adjustment when an individual is diagnosed. However, it doesn't necessarily mean a complete overhaul of the relationships. There was a portion in the book where Adam reminisced and actually longed for interactions he used to have with people, such as family members. It was times when the interactions were just like any other people, watching a movie, being silly, as opposed to the other person almost awaiting like their symptoms or kind of tiptoeing because they're not sure like how the person is doing in the moment. This is important because individuals can already feel a loss of identity or just like a confusion about who they are when they are going through a diagnosis. And diagnoses can make people think, okay, so who am I now? Was who I was before this real? Am I a different person now? Like, it brings up a lot of questions about themselves and their place in the world. My standpoint when it comes to diagnoses is that it is not the individual's sole identity, which sometimes the individual can feel like for different reasons. Like, there are many other things that the person is, such as like a son, a friend, a soccer player, a certain profession. There are also positive qualities about them. So there are so many other things that define an individual, and their diagnosis and the symptoms they experience is just like one component of them, but it's not their whole identity. And so I really liked that part of the book. I felt like that was like a very important piece for people to know. Like, sometimes when an individual is diagnosed or someone, tells someone that they have a certain diagnosis, there's almost this kind of like stall. And sometimes friends or family members or others can be kind of stumped at like what to do. And I will say that there is still importance in doing the things that they used to do, whether it's like family night or certain silly interactions or just like being there with them as a human, like things like that are so important and really does help the person feel secure, feel okay, and feeling like they're still like who they were originally. With that, when the books talked about like social support, the parents were informed. Like, mother had educated herself, and stepfather used his knowledge in law to help Adam when it came to ensuring that the new school staff knew the diagnosis, but that it didn't get out to the other students. So that was a good piece, like in that, like they were informed, and they also like advocated for him, in that way, which says a lot, because I think that's definitely like a hard balance for family to do. Like, the education piece is one. So to have that part and to have family members that know the FAQs and the facts and, kind of like the myths and misconceptions is super, super important. But then to have like the advocacy piece and someone like there for your rights and, like that was something that I think was a huge advantage for Adam, so that like he didn't experience what he did at his previous school when he went to this new school. Another part that was really great is that Adam's mother pretty much assisted Adam in his like social interactions. He already had a friend, but the planning that she did was beneficial. And what I mean by that is like, so those living with mental illness like benefit from this extra step to schedule and maintain how the individual interacts with their peers. The mother, made sure and kind of already had spoken to Adam's friend's mother to kind of plan out Adam and his friend getting together on the same day each week to, do an activity. And that permanency had really helped. Even after finding out about his diagnosis, his friend didn't recluse and they continued to hang out. Like there was a period like after Adam had been discharged from a psychiatric hospital, his friend still showed up that same day of the week to play tennis and said he knew that he was in the hospital. They ate Oreos, packed up his stuff. Like it didn't matter to the friend, so that was definitely a good experience for Adam to have, because what he had experienced before, especially, with the previous friend that he saw at the grocery store that pretended not to see him, was that this isn't how it works out. Like there was almost probably this expectation or waiting for him to just not show up or leave, or for the friendship to be weird and different from then on. But it really wasn't. Like Dwight maintained who he was. He still showed up. They were still friends. It kind of like acting like it didn't really matter. So that was a nice experience for Adam. And even the girlfriend that Adam ended up having was also supportive after finding out about the diagnosis by just acknowledging the diagnosis. Like, I think it was interesting that Adam seemed kind of, especially when he explained like the beginning of his diagnosis, coming to terms with it, like, okay, is this what's happening? Whereas like his girlfriend, when the girlfriend found out, she was very like accepting, like, okay, yeah, this is what it is. And like outright expressing that she was going to be there for him, which was nice. And he almost kind of like does this little like pushback, and this is pretty common where it's like, okay, so now people know and now they're like staying here and they're outright expressing it. I'm going to, push away, no, you don't want to deal with this, kind of thing. And his girlfriend was like, no, I'm here. Like, and I'm here to stay and I'm going to support, how I can, which was great. That was a great thing for him to experience. So he had a lot of what we call like corrective emotional experiences, which is pretty much someone seeing you for who you are, being there, and in a way that others weren't before in the past, essentially. Random topic that I have to say, because I can't help it, is that I love how Harry Potter was mentioned. And it was mentioned twice. So those that know me know I'm like a huge Harry Potter fan, so I pretty much love any Harry Potter reference. But one reference in the book was Adam thinking about his symptom of hearing a voice through the walls and relating it to Harry Potter, because he was waiting for his letter to Hogwarts arrive, which never arrived. And for those of you who are Harry Potter fans, I'm sure you can feel like how devastating this was. For those of you who don't know too much about Harry Potter, what this essentially conveys is a huge letdown. So Harry Potter had a very tough childhood and was treated like dirt. Then when his magical abilities began manifesting and he got his letters to come to Hogwarts School of Magic, everything that he had been told to believe about himself, which was that he was weird, strange, and not accepted, was not true. Instead, he learned how his abilities were gifts and was looked at highly in like the magical world. So I loved how like even Harry Potter made its way into this book, because I'm a huge fan, and I always use a lot of like Harry Potter metaphors therapeutically too, interestingly. But that I had to say. So moving on to non-random. The book talks a lot about hallucinations, because this is a symptom of schizophrenia, and this is very much what Adam was trying to keep at bay. So the book does a good job describing what the experience might be for an individual. The author met with professionals to learn correct information about schizophrenia, which I thought was awesome. When people hear about hallucinations, they most of the time think about how, okay, this means someone will hear or see things others don't. However, there are many other hallucinations, such as taste, touch, smell, and Adam experienced multiple types, and they'd occur at the same time. So one thing that I noticed when it came to the hallucinations was Adam would stall or wait before reacting, because if it was something new, he would have to try to figure out in that moment if what he was seeing or hearing or smelling or anything was real or hallucination. And I thought that was so powerful, because seeing a person that, you know, is living with schizophrenia in the moment, sometimes there's kind of like this lag, or just kind of moving slowly, or like pause, or just kind of like a slow reaction time. And that part really made me think, because there's a lot, like, we could tell sometimes, like, okay, there's a lot going on, like, within, right? Probably within the body, within the mind, you know, because there's a lot of different stimuli going on. And I thought it was really interesting how, like, the book had talked about, well, this might be why, right? It's like just trying to differentiate, like, what's real and what isn't. Like, that to me was super, super powerful. Like, imagine trying to go about your day and then, like, something new happens, you see something like maybe you didn't notice before, and they're just kind of standing there wondering, like, okay, is that real or not? You know, like, to have to do that, like, all the time for each thing, like, it just really shows, you know, how this is something that is, you know, really, really challenging to experience. Last topic has to do with coping skills. So Adam liked cooking, and it was an activity that actually helped shift his focus. When it comes to any diagnosis or distress, it's important to have some go-to tasks or things when you're flooded with the symptoms or emotions. These coping skills are usually also added to people's safety plans, and a safety plan is pretty much like, if an individual has a history of hurting themselves or others, we will include coping skills or things that they can do in the moment when they're feeling flooded with those thoughts and feelings, to kind of shift their focus away so they can go do these things. I saw an interview with the author of this book, who had mentioned that she wanted to give Adam something else to manage what he was experiencing other than the experimental drugs, he thought, which I thought is very important, because it's so important to have these go-to things. So all in all, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really accurate and a good story. I liked how it was really comprehensive in covering different aspects of the diagnosis, life stage development stuff, and how other people in the individual's life come in and kind of where they stand. There's other topics that I did not cover that are related to mental health in this book. So if you're interested, definitely check out this book. I read recently too that this book is being made into a movie. So I'm really looking forward to that. Thanks very much for listening. Hopefully this was informative or helpful. If you have any book suggestions or books you would like discussed on this podcast, you can email it to booksbetweensessions@gmail.com. If you're a mental health professional and would like to be on the podcast, you can go ahead and contact me at booksbetweensessions@gmail.com. Also, this podcast is not psychotherapy or counseling. If you need to speak with a professional, you should find one local to you and contact them directly. If this is an emergency, please call your local emergency number or go to your nearest emergency department. All information about this book, and also if you want to find out more about me, I will put it in the show notes of this episode. All right. Thanks so much for listening. Take care.